What's up everyone, Steven here from TechMaker Studio. In this workshop, we're going to be looking at how to look at what NFTs somebody owns without using OpenSea. Now, just a quick note, if you've been following along with the Building a Twitter Clone, the Decentralized Twitter Clone series, we're not quitting that. I was actually working on how to build out the profile feature so that people could set up images and profile pictures and all that stuff and store that on Aleph. And now I have hit a roadblock with where to pull the data from. And so that's what this episode is about, is how can we do that without using the OpenSea API. So up until recently, you could pull back a list of assets, aka NFTs, that somebody owns based on their address from OpenSea's public API. Now, and I have projects that I've already released that are relying on this, so I have to solve this problem because I'm worried that everything that I've built is going to break soon. I don't know what they've done internally, but some stuff's still working, some stuff isn't. But long story short, now they require an API key. Now that doesn't seem complicated, except for if we come down here and let's open this in a new incognito window so that I can show you what it actually is. It's not like you can just sign up and get an API key. You have to fill out this application, give them an explanation of why you need an API key. And then I filled this out earlier and it actually told me, hey, we'll get back to you in a few business days. So I don't even know if I'm going to get it. So I really need a way that is dependable to actually query what NFTs somebody owns. So in the example of our Twitter clone, we're going to have something where you're setting up your profile and it prompts you with a list of all your NFTs to pick from to set as your profile pick. And I also have a game called Hot Potato, hotpotato.market, if you're curious, that me and some other friends built. And it's pretty cool, and we use a similar feature there where we query actually this exact URL to grab whatever NFTs you've got and let you set them as profile pictures. So like I said, and the thing is, the API from OpenSea and OpenSea in general has just proven to be super unreliable. So I don't know if the problem I'm getting today is specifically because of this API key thing. It looks like it is because I'm getting 403 not authorized when I try to run a request that I've been running for a while. But I'm not actually sure because it's just kind of always been buggy. And if you've bought NFTs, if you use OpenSea at all, you know that their site goes down constantly. So anyway, we won't be using this. So what is the answer? Well, me being me, the first thing I thought is, well, why can't I just run my own node and index it somehow, blah, 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 and just pull things straight from the chain? I mean, after all, this is all public information, right? So I started Googling around for this, and admittedly, this is not my specialty. So if you're listening to this and you're an Ethereum dev or something, you're going to be like, yeah, that's not as easy as you think. And you'd be right. But what I found was, okay, this guy writes this article with an update from not too long ago. And he says that this Aragon thing, whatever that is, lessens the requirement of running an archive node. So one thing that I do know is if you want to pull like the entire history, you have to run an archive node, not a full node. The full node doesn't give you more than like so many days or weeks worth of data. So you'd have to run an archive node if you want to have the full history of every transaction so that you could sort of rebuild like what people currently own. He's saying this went from taking 6 months to synchronize in 12 terabytes of hard drive space to 3 weeks to synchronize in 2.5 terabytes of hard drive space. So doing this would be 3 weeks of waiting, plus you'd have to have this 2.5 terabytes of hard drive space. That seems a little bit heavy-handed. That's not something I'm interested in doing right now. Maybe later. Actually, I'm definitely interested in doing it, but it doesn't solve my problem today, which is having a quick way to find out what NFTs people own. This is the docs for the Aragon thing. I've been kind of looking through that. It's interesting. I'm going to come back to this because for reasons I'll explain later. What I did find is Etherscan has a list of token transfer events for a given address. So this is what we're going to end up using, and it's actually quite nice. So this API is also centralized in the sense that Etherscan controls it. And ultimately, this is why I would be thinking about, okay, I'd like to run my own node and build out more of like a public good API and so on and so forth, something that anybody can use and nobody's ever going to stop you, so on and so forth. But I think Etherscan does kind of represent that mentality in the space as far as I'm aware. I mean, anybody who's done anything in crypto has been on Etherscan or Polygon Scan or whatever scan, because they make all the transactions and stuff easily available. So what does the API result look like? So if we come down here, we can see the request and things we can pass in and the response. So we essentially want to be able to pass in the address. We're going to ignore the contract address field because we want to get any NFT from any contract, essentially. We're going to ignore the end block and start block and the sorting. We won't do anything right now with page and offset. Basically, the offset is just the number per page listed. So this is just pagination. So if you have 200 and you separate it into offsets of 50, you'd have 4 pages. You can set the off. I don't know how high you can set the offset. I've gone up to 200 and it seems to work fine. Maybe you can go higher than that. I don't really know. But anyway, so basically we're just going to worry with the address. And then once we build this, because we're going to build this into a service that we're going to use soon, which again, I'm going to explain more as we progress. And then ultimately we'll turn this into an NPM module that we'll put into our Twitter clone and various other projects. And in those situations where we need to query and get, like, let's say somebody has tons and tons and tons of NFTs, what you'd actually have to do is cycle through all the pages, which would mean you would need an API key and all this stuff. So we'll get to all that in just a second, but for now we're going to ignore it in this episode. What I do want to look at more is the response. So you can see that this doesn't look like the OpenSea information where you get stuff about the actual NFT. You're getting the transaction information, which does have some handy things, like you have like crypto kitties, the token symbol, some of that stuff, but this is really the raw transaction. So if we come over here and look at a real example, you can see the same data. So one thing to look at is in our URL, there are all these parameters. So you can see here we have the page equals 1, offset equals 200. I'm assuming that they default start block and end block to 0 and then the very latest, and then obviously we don't have an API key here. But the important thing here is the address, okay? So you can see if you look through these transactions that this is a result that has the to address set to that address. If we look, I'm sure we can find one. I don't know where one would be, and I don't want to have to scroll through all of them, but you could certainly find one where the from address is actually this address. So what those represent are transfers to and from this person. So what I want to do is actually build a script that will figure out what they currently own. Because just having these transactions doesn't mean they own them. They could have bought it and then sold it. So what we need to do is basically say, okay, give me all the buys and then subtract the sells, and then whatever is left theoretically should be our owned NFTs. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so I've got my terminal open here. I'm gonna make a new directory and we'll just call this like NFT owner, something like that, doesn't matter. So we'll change that into there and we'll npm install -yes. And then we will go ahead and npm install Axios for doing some URL querying. Okay, so now let's do this. Let's say node, let me zoom in a little bit to make this easier on everybody, hopefully. So we'll say node experimental REPL await, which will allow us to use the await keyword in here. Okay, so what I want to do first is say const Axios equals require Axios. Now, if you're not familiar, Axios just lets us run web requests. So what we can do is say const response equals await axios.get, and then let's just paste in this URL. Okay, and now let's have a look at our response. And so you can see we get this pretty big JavaScript object. We have this down here. You can see we have data and then dot result. So, and that looks a lot like what we're seeing over here, right? So we can say, what do we call that? Response.data.result, like that. So what I want to do here is just, so what this actually is, it is a list of transactions, right? So we can say const transactions equals that, and then let's see how many we have, dot length. So we have 106 transactions. So as I said, some of these are buys and some of them are sells. So let me come over here really quick and copy the address. So we'll say let address equal that. Okay, so what I want to do is I first want to start by finding the buys. Okay, and now these may not necessarily be buys, like these could be somebody transferred it to me directly or whatever, but as far as we're concerned, like you have buys and sells, so it just kind of keeps it simple. So what we can do is say const buys equals, and I'm going to say let, in case I screw this up, let buys equal txs, and then we're going to filter, and I'm going to say transaction, and I want to get the transaction where the 2 is the address. So we'll say return tx.to is address. Okay, so let's do buys.length, and you can see we have 89. So we can do the same thing with cells. So we can say let cells equals txs.filter tx, and now that we see how this works, we can put it all in one line, and they'll just say return tx.from equals address. Let me do that again and just say, okay, so now we have cells.length is 17. So 89 minus 17, we should have 72 NFTs that we own. So how do we filter down to just those transactions? So what we can do is say, well, first of all, let's look at this JavaScript array method sum. So what we can do is say, let's look at up here, what do we have? Let's look at cells really quick. Okay, so we have token ID 559, contract address is that. Okay, so what we can do is say buys.sum buy. Okay, and then we can return, and then we can say buy.token ID is equal to 5559, and the buy.contract address equals this. Okay, let's close all that off. Busy is not defined. Let me try that one more time and spell that correctly. Okay, so basically what this is saying is that there's at least one buy where the token ID is equal to 559 and the contract address is equal to that. Now the reason I did this is because this, when we basically when I selected this, it's just because it's inside of our cells list. So naturally everything that's in the cells list, we had to buy it first. Like we had to have we didn't necessarily have to buy it. It could have just been transferred to us, but there has to be some transaction saying like, hey, this went from somewhere to you. So there's got to be this starting transaction so that I receive it. So categorically, it's true that for every sell or for every transfer out away from us, there has to be a buy or a transfer in. So what we can do is use this same logic or similar logic to actually sort through all of our buys and filter out all of the sells. Hopefully this will make more sense in just a second. Okay, so what we can do is say let owned equal, and then we can do buys dot filter, and then I'm gonna put this out all on multiple lines so that it's easier to follow. So now what we want to do is say sells. Actually, we want to say not sells.sum. So you could, like, it might be a little bit better syntactic sugar to be able to say sells.none. So think of it like that. But what we're trying to say is there aren't any cells. And so we'll say sell. And actually what I need to do is return this. So we'll say there aren't any cells where the buy.token ID is equal to the sell.token ID, and the buy.contract address is equal to the sell.contract address. And again, we need to actually return this so that it actually works. So we'll say return that. Okay, and then we'll just close these things off, and then we'll look at owned.length. And so you can see we have 72. Now, if we want to just kind of spot check this, we could do owned, and let's look up here for like, oh boy, here's one, pleb punks 562. So let's go to OpenSea and let's search pleb punks 562. Okay, so we can look at this and see that that is in fact the address. And then let's look at cells, and we can look at pleb punks 720. And yes, I do realize all this stuff is goofy. What in the world? I started skimming this, and honestly, it looks like there's like a bunch of semi-offensive crap in here. At first, I thought it was like seed phrases. So I don't know what that is. I'm going to inquire. That is super weird. But anyway, if we go to plebpunk 720, you'll see that it's owned by somebody else. And if we scroll down to the history, you can see there was a transfer from 0x Moonbags, which yes is an old goofy Twitter name I used to have, to 21185B. So anyway, I wonder if I can recreate that thing with the search. If I do pleb punks 721. Yes, I can. What on earth? What if I put in a different number? What if I put in board ape 11234 or something? Okay, so this is a super weird bug, and I'm gonna inquire about it. But anyway, that's pretty much it for this episode in terms of what we needed to do. That was kind of an interesting, bizarre detour. So yeah. Like I said, we're trying not to use OpenSea. That's kind of crazy. Anyway, what we're going to be doing with this, in the next episode, I'm going to work on building up a service so that even if somebody's got like 10,000 NFTs, they can hit our API with their address, and we'll cycle through the Etherscan data, pull back all their transactions, and catalog what they actually own. And we may even try to hook up Web3 so that we can query, actually the metadata for each one. So we can sort of index the NFTs like that the same way that OpenSea does on a kind of on-demand basis by individual users. So I think that will basically get us to a point where if we wanted to have something where when you connect your wallet in an app, we can go out and fetch all of the NFTs that you own and catalog all of it, and then present you with a picture and say, okay, which one of these do you want to use as your profile picture, and so on and so forth. Anyway, all of that being said, I think that's pretty much it for this episode. We will keep going with this new service in the next one. If you made it this far, I appreciate you watching. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Leave any comments you have below, any questions, and we'll get back to you. And also subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and I'll talk to you later.